Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I hope everybody had a great Pesach and more or less recovered back into chametz mode. But we are now getting into new holiday mode as we're preparing for the first three modern holidays, the Yoms of Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and then, of course, Yom Ha'atzmaut, later to be followed by Yom Yerushalayim. So we have a difficult, but I think important topic to discuss today as we approach Yom HaShoah, which is Sunday night and Monday. And I want to try to tackle this and leave some time we usually run out of time, but I'm going to try to see if we can finish a few minutes early to give some people a chance if you want to offer some opinions of your own or some thoughts of your own on this very, very controversial subject. Basically, trying to approach and see if it is possible to have any kind of understanding of the spiritual foundation for the Shoah, this great tragedy, maybe the greatest of all tragedies in Jewish history. And the question is, how can we approach it from a spiritual point of view? And are we even allowed to try to understand it? Is it something that completely defies any rationalization or any understanding whatsoever? And that is indeed one approach to the Shoah. Basically, don't ask. Don't go there. You can read up on it, you can know, and you can learn about, we're still learning about the Shoah and the events of the Holocaust, but don't try to figure it out. I've told the story before, how one year in the yeshiva, so one of the Rabbanim, Rav Moshe Meiselman, he's quite well known. He's head of a yeshiva now in Yerushalayim, and he is the nephew of our former Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, the Rav's brother. And he came out one year prior to Yom HaShoah with a discussion and an approach to try to understand why the Holocaust occurred. What did we do that triggered this terrible calamity? Because we do believe that events in history do not happen in a vacuum. They happen because Hashem wills it, in a sense, wants it to happen. So why the Shoah? I'll come later to what his approach was, but I can tell you that his uncle, Rav Soloveitchik, was very upset to hear that his nephew was proposing a understanding of the Shoah. And I think even to the extent they tried to recall the papers that had been given out, because he said no one can hope to understand why the Shoah occurred. He said nobody's a Navi, and we don't have Ruach HaKodesh today. If anybody claims to have Ruach HaKodesh, as I've often said, make sure you hold on to your wallet, because there's usually an ulterior motive that's not pleasant. Nobody has Ruach HaKodesh, he said, and therefore we should not even make an attempt to understand why the Shoah occurred. And in some ways, this is indeed, to this day, the Haredi approach. It's, in a sense, there is no official commemoration in the Haredi world of Yom HaShoah, and they would try, I think, very hard to discourage anyone from coming forward to try to explain it. Although there may be individuals here and there who do, and I'll come back to that later. One of the other difficulties in trying to find a reason is that the moment you take that step, you open yourselves up to everybody else's opinion and you create what can be a very divisive and unrewarding conversation because we don't know the truth. You see this reflected, interestingly enough, even vis-a-vis Zionism, because there are groups that say this was a divine reaction to the fact that we did not take the opportunity and leave Europe and go to Israel when we had the chance. And had we done that, maybe the Shoah never would have happened, that we, in a sense, rejected this gift of Hashem, the fledgling state. It was not yet, of course, declared a state, but it was there, it was operating, there was a yishuv, and we could have gone there. So many people want to say, well, by rejecting God's gift, that caused divine anger, and the result was the Shoah. And of course, you can also argue that had we all left Europe and gone to Israel, then there would be no Jews in Europe to murder. But at the same time that you present that argument, there's a counter argument that people propose and say, no, it was dafka because there were Jews in Europe who promoted the idea of a Jewish state when, according to their ideology, this is pushing the envelope in a way that God is very, very perturbed by, and that we should not have made the move to even try to go to Israel. And by doing so, we angered God, and the Holocaust resulted. So you see, you really step onto very dangerous ground when you try to form at least a political approach, because you're going to, you say black, somebody else will say white, and you're not going to get anywhere with it. You can have your own beliefs, of course, but you then create a very divisive argument. Nevertheless, I would say that even though you have to be careful about discussing the underlying reasons or motivation behind the Shoah, we have a problem. If we don't try to understand what happened here, how can we learn from it? And as an example, we see that the Gemara does indeed examine the catastrophe, the greatest catastrophe prior to the Shoah, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and does indeed give many, many reasons why it happened, according to the different Chachamim. You see this in Baba Metzia, in Gemara Shabbat. We all know the famous statement in the Gemara of Yuma about Sinat Chinam and the first Beit HaMikdash, why it was destroyed, and the second, why it was destroyed. So you see that the Chachamim there did try to glean some insight from that Churban. Now, you can argue the Chachamim, of course, had Ruach HaKodesh. They were at a very different level than we are. That's true. But you can also say that they are setting a kind of precedent. Go ahead and look into it and see, what you can gather from it. And then they give many, many different reasons that generally focus on things we did or didn't do that cause Hashem to react in a very negative way. And you can delve into that as well and see some of those things might even apply in the days pre-Holocaust as well. But I want to, so therefore, I think it's okay to kind of explore this issue. We don't have to remain silent about it. I think that it's all right to discuss it, but we should be careful about thinking we have any conclusive conclusion that answers our questions. I think I want to present three different ideas that have been given by different Rabbanim. And there are many such ideas to discuss, but I'm just going to take three of them. In a discussion I had once with Rav Nachman Kahana, who is the brother of the late Rav Meir Kahana, He's a great scholar in many ways. And he said, in his opinion, the real issue of the Shoah was that we were caught in a struggle between two great powers, the Allies and the Axis powers, that were fighting a kind of a war between civilizations. You can say fascism or totalitarianism versus democracy. And we somehow got caught in the middle of it. That maybe had we not been there, and then we were incidental in a sense to a greater struggle that was going on. I won't get into it now, but I think we can see that struggle forming now on a almost World War III level, clash of civilizations that we're seeing reflected in many ways by what's going on in America, and this trend towards kind of promoting totalitarianism and, in a sense, anti-establishmentism becomes the springboard and the favorite flavor of the day. But without getting into that, so says Rav Kahana that it was something we were caught in the middle of. I don't particularly subscribe to that, because my own feeling is that the attempt to destroy the Jewish people, to commit genocide against Jews on a worldwide level, this was not incidental. This was one of the priorities, if not the main priority, of the Nazis. And it filtered down to some of the other countries as well that try to destroy its Jewish population. So I think that clearly we were not a sideshow, although obviously there were other things. It was a worldwide struggle, but we were not something incidental. So I would kind of personally not subscribe to that. But there's two other approaches that I want to discuss. So one, as I spoke about with Rav Meiselman and what he wanted to present to us, he said that there is something we can call the carry concept. Now, the word carry is a word, kufresh yud, that is used extensively throughout the text of the Tochacha, the curses, that many people associate with the Holocaust, that these terrible tragedies that will come upon us when we do not follow Hashem, that we lump into one term, the Tochacha. It's really in two different parshiot. It's in Kitavo, it's in Bechukotai, and it uses, in at least one case, the word carry 7 times. The Torah, if the Torah repeats something 7 times, a word, you know that it has significance. The word carry, he says, connects to the word mikret, randomness. And he said that when there is a failure to see and acknowledge the Yad Hashem, the hand of God in all things, that's very dangerous for us. If we, and this is the concept that comes out of this word carry, that we conducted ourselves. V'halachtem imi b'carry, says God. You walked with me in the sense of randomness, that you didn't acknowledge that everything in life has a purpose, that God is steering the ship of history, and he is guiding the world. Once you decide that no, things are random, there's not an active God, it's a very dangerous situation, because what you do is, in a sense, you are saying, no, things just happen because they happen. We're a nation like any other nation. We operate by the same rules of history. And if that's what you think, in a sense, Hashem says, okay, then let's see how you do when I, in a sense, turn away, take away that guardianship, that force field around you, so that you're treated like every other nation and things happen to you like to anyone else. Then essentially, since every other empire, every other group in history has a pretty short shelf life and ultimately vanishes and is conquered, and nothing left of them, like we see throughout history, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, etc., then if you conduct yourself that way, so I'll conduct myself that way too. You don't give any special notice to me. I won't give notice to you. And then, of course, disaster happens. Until such time, and we begin to suffer the fate of all these other civilizations of history, until such time as we regroup and say, something's wrong here. We're not like any other nation. And we see that all the nations are against us. And clearly, there's something unique about the Jewish people. And it's our uniqueness, and it's our connection to Hashem, that lifeline, that keeps us intact throughout history. And in a sense, we come back to Hashem, and that's when things get better, and that's when miracles occur, and that's when we are able to rebound from these terribly tragic days. And so immediately following, we see regeneration of the Jewish people after these terrible calamities. After the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, we see the advent of the Beit Knesset. We see that we developed the Torah She'Ba'al Peh, the Gemara. After the events of the Shoa, we almost immediately established the state of Israel, and we not only reestablished Torah learning, but more Jews are learning Torah today than at any other point in all of our history. So good things happen when we return to Hashem. So that was his approach, and what he felt was going on, what was behind all of the terrible events of the Shoah. Again, it sprang from our own action or inaction, and we had to reclaim Hashem in order to put an end to it. Even though we have this promise we will never be completely eliminated, nevertheless, we certainly don't want to suffer the kind of losses that we did, which we still have not actually come back from the pre-Shoah days. Our population is still lower than it was in 1938. So this was his approach, and others have picked up on it as well. And then there is another approach that some Rabbanim have proposed in trying to understand what's happening here. And this is what we call the pressure cooker concept of the Shoah. And there are a few different Rabbanim who have come forward with this. You can probably Google it and see what you come up with. But basically it says that we have a history, the Jewish people, as we know. We don't always behave ourselves on a spiritual level. And we do, unfortunately, fall short of God's expectations on a regular basis. And Hashem, however, is Keil Erech Apayim. He's very, very patient. And these sins of ours, these, how shall I put it, when we go off the track, they are not immediately dealt with. In a sense, they build up, and Hashem is not going to punish as we go along. He's going to give us a chance to do better. But if we don't do better, then like the pressure cooker that gets hotter and hotter, and the pressure inside builds, at some point it has to explode. And something has to happen in order to release the pressure. Something, unfortunately, of a negative, tragic nature has to happen so that somehow all of these sins and misdeeds are taken into account and are dealt with. And the more time that goes by, the more we don't do the things we ought to do, the greater the pressure and the greater the explosion when that pressure cooker finally blows its lid. And so they want to say that this is why periodically in Jewish history we have tragedies, because in a sense we need to have them in order to survive. If we don't have this periodic punishment, then we're looking at something that could be a total demise. And so in a sense, it's almost, if you can say this, a bracha, a blessing, that the pressure is relieved when this happens to us, and in a sense, we get what is coming to us so that we can regroup and go on. You may like or not like that, but there is a certain logic to it. And finally, I want to say on my own account, not that this is an explanation for the Shoah, but to say that we cannot look at it in a sense in real time, because the best example of this is the Pesach we just finished. You are reading a Haggadah that is filled with songs and filled with upbeat tefillot and a mood that is clearly celebratory. But we are, if you really want to see the truth, we are commemorating an event that was its own Holocaust. Rashi says 80% of the Jews of Egypt never made it out of Egypt. Basically the same number of Jews killed in the Shoah in Europe. So where do we have the audacity to celebrate? Yes, we have maror. Yes, we have salt water. Yes, we talk a little bit Abadim Hayinu, but that's a tiny part of the Haggadah. The vast majority of the Haggadah is very upbeat. So how do we dare to be joyous about something that was such a terrible event? The answer is because we see it as one chapter in a very positive book that goes from slavery to miraculous liberation, to the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai, to the entrance to Israel, and all the other chapters that flow from it. And so we can view it in a perspective that gives us a very, very different view than just looking at those events in and of themselves. And I suggest that the Shoah is so close to us that we only see it now in its in a sense, in real time. We see it in all of its terror, and we don't see the whole picture. We're starting to see that picture because of all the miraculous events that came after the Shoah, but we're too close to really acknowledge that and to see it in a broad perspective where we might say, like we do for Pesach, all in all, Jewish history is a very wonderful and ongoing miracle that we all experience. And perhaps that day will come when we have the perspective and we may see the Shoah in a slightly different light. We won't dismiss it and we won't deny it, but maybe we'll see it in the viewing room of many different events that followed it, that changed to a great extent our outlook on what happened. So I presented a few different ideas about the Shoah. Everybody has their own emotional reaction to it, and no one can disagree or contradict or dispute fully whatever your viewpoint is, because they're all out there. And I mean, obviously, we Jews love to argue. We can always find something wrong with every argument. But right now, it's something that really is so powerful and so close that we are still grappling and struggling to come to our senses about it. And I suspect that will continue for a long, long time. And I hope that we will indeed reach the same kind of perspective that we reached with Pesach. I'll stop here. And I asked our intrepid host, Yossi, that if somebody wants to say a word or two very briefly, you can unmute yourself and feel free to offer an opinion. You could also theoretically put it in the chat. If anybody wants to comment, feel free. Do not be shy.
Just want to ask about the important thing that in Judaism is the nekama, revenge. How important is it to revenge? Like it's the values of God. Nekama is values of God, and a lot of people they're affected by the Western world, and they don't know the value of nekama, and they just hear it. They have bad view, but it's very, very important. The nekama is very, very important, and in the Judaism.
You are quite right. You are quite right that in the current politically correct atmosphere, people don't like to talk about revenge. Simon Wiesenthal wrote a book called Justice, Not Revenge, and trying to say what we're willing to do is justice. But Judaism does have a place for revenge. We say it every Wednesday when we say the Shir Shal Yom, Kel Nikamot Hashem, Kel Nikamot Ophia, God of revenge appear. And there is a very important place for the idea of revenge because it is tied up with justice and with the fact that when there has to be a reckoning for the things that you do wrong. Some people want to say, okay, maybe we leave that up to Hashem and let, El Nikamot Hashem, so let God do the revenge. But we are the messengers of Hashem, and I think there is a certain element of revenge that is actually quite appropriate, even though the world doesn't like to acknowledge that. But I think Judaism definitely has a place for it, even though, as I said, it's not politically correct. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And anybody else?
We can learn from King David, Amelech David, because at night King David studied Torah, and the day he kaba plishtim. You have to combine both of them to be complete, because if not, you're like disabled person.
Yes, you can learn it. You can learn it indeed from many different examples in the Torah where revenge indeed was taken. I mean, the best example is that the Midianites, Hashem says, take revenge on Midian, and says that beferush. So yes, thank you very much, David. Anybody else have a comment that you would like to bring out now that David was brave enough to start? If anybody else, we have 2 or 3 minutes. If anybody has another comment.
Yeah, sorry.
So is there anybody else that wants to say something? I'm not pushing you, but if not, then I will assume you agreed with everything that we said. But there's a lot to think about, and you're always welcome afterwards to mull this over and send in a comment. Next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, it is the week of Yom HaShoah, and then we have Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, but it doesn't affect Thursday, so Be'ezrat Hashem, we shall try to have our shir going on Thursday as well. So wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom, B'sorot Tovot, and we want to say good health and welfare for our soldiers, so I'll close with the Mishaber for Tzahal. Mishaber Chavatenu Abraham Yitzchak V'Yakov, Hu Yivarech, at Chaylei Tzva Ganal Yisrael Ha'omdim Al Mishmar Tzenu Barei Eloheinu Migbul HaLevanon Bad Midbar Mitzrayim Min Hayam HaGadol Ad Levo HaArava B'Yabasha Ba'Abiru Bayam Yitein Adonai Toivenu Hakamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifnehem Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor V'Yatzil Et Chayleinu Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah Mikol Negu Machala V'Yishlach Bracha V'Tzlacha B'Chol Masei Dehem Yadber Sonenu Taktihem V'Yatrein B'Chet Yeshua V'Ter Nitzachon V'Kuyam B'Em HaKatuv K'Adonai Elohechem V'Olechem Lachem L'Ilachem Lechem Imoivechem Loshia Etchem V'Nomar Amen. And we will remember to say tefillot Le'ilui Nishmot Kol HaChalalei Shoa this week. May their memory be acknowledged and blessed, and Hashem should indeed take vengeance upon those not only who committed the terrible events of the Shoah, but upon those who would emulate and do what they did as well. May Hashem deal with them as he has dealt in the past with those who went up against the Jewish people. Shabbat
Amen.
Shalom, Barach, Besarot Tovot, Yeshuot, V'Nechamot.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.